So why don't we head straight to the agenda? And the first thing is an update from the department. So Brian Walsh, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Chelsea. I think we do have a good substantive meeting, so I'll kind of defer right to that. But just say briefly that we've been doing a lot of communicating around the July 1st minimum wage increase. We were either myself or staff were on several different radio stations. We made my first appearance on Univision local television, which is exciting, I think, to try to branch out and raise more awareness and kind of using the minimum wage increase as a reason or in some ways an excuse to do that, because I kind of mention everything at the same time and work in wage theft and explain how that's related and so it can save time and other things as well. And also just kind of used all of the city normal communications that reach kind of people who would receive that kind of stuff. Um, Other updates, you know what, I would like to mention some really good meetings recently with Tool organizers and Rock organizers and some others. And we have another meeting this Thursday. Just building more and deeper and better relationships and strategy, etc. With it seems like more and more people on the ground doing the work of enforcement and raising awareness. So I think that's good, a good update for now, but good things happening for sure.
Well, thank you. Can you remind me when the annual reports are due each year from the
Yeah,
department?
yeah. I'm preparing a report right now. We have
That's
a
what I
lot of
was.
the
It, it felt like that was about the time of the year we do this.
Yeah, it should have already been presented, honestly. But I am going to present it hopefully later this month. I thought at the same time or after, perhaps there's a report from the Downtown Workers Committee subcommittee. It would be an appropriate time to also give some updates to the council members. A lot of the data is actually available in almost real time. I think it's updated daily or maybe weekly. But a lot of the data is actually on a data portal that we have and is updated again continuously. So it's out there and available, but it's helpful to bring it to the attention of policymakers.
Great. And I didn't give you the heads up on this question, but is the council still fully virtual in terms of these presentations and comments, et cetera? And is there like a sunset date for that? Or do you have any of the intel?
Yeah, yeah, it is still virtual, and I think that there was an expectation from a lot of city staff and policymakers that it was about to go in person. Um, and I'm not sure the mechanics or the behind the scenes, but I saw a note that I think at council um, suggestion, that's going to slow down a little bit, and they're going to do that a little bit more intentionally and over the next maybe looking towards the fall is what I could take from it. But the immediate thing to know is that they're not going to be in person at least during this month of July, and I would expect probably not back in person in August, but that would be the soonest.
And will the same hold true for these committee meetings?
Oh, right. Sorry. That's probably what you were asking about.
No, I
Okay.
asked about city council and then
Yeah.
now I'm
Okay.
adding on this.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, me and Ashley are trying to work through that. I think the clerk's office, if it's listening, is is has its eye on moving all boards and commissions back in person at some point. But Ashley and I were having a discussion, and maybe we can put this on. Maybe we can, if anyone has any strong feelings, we can talk about it now or put it on a future agenda. But we had the sense, and I have the sense that maybe some of our WAC members prefer this virtual format rather than coming to park downtown. I don't know. Maybe there's not a uniform opinion or a consensus opinion. But there might be a way that this committee um, could try to do something virtual or even some kind of hybrid depending upon
I just
wish.
was wondering if there was already guidance being written or anything like that. So it sounds like we have some time to weigh in. So I think it would be good if, Ashley, I saw you go off mute. Did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. I think it would be good if maybe we sort of pulled the committee and saw what value they have in-person, hybrid, or online only. So not to derail the conversation. So then the next, did you anything else, Brian?
No, I think that's good for now. Thank you.
So now we move on to the agenda where any committee members can make announcements, whether it's something you're seeing happening in your industry or events or activities or things that are good for the entire group to know. So I'll open it up to any announcements. Not seeing any hands. Well, I have two, and I might have mentioned this first one at the last meeting, but Bloomington is up and running with their worker business committee as well. Wade, who's on this committee, is also on the Bloomington one. There's a Main Street Alliance representative. There's several business representatives. There's a few more community organizations and a few other labor groups represented. So their first meeting, I believe, is in a couple weeks. So it's going to be exciting to see what Bloomington comes up with in their process. And my communications with the stakeholders in Bloomington, I mean, I probably sound like a broken record to them, is enforcement, 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 enforcement. So, you know, we'll stay. I think we should stay in touch with both them and St. Paul and Duluth. This is a pie in the sky idea, but maybe someday we should get a few representatives from each of the committees together. And then my second update is like hot off the press. So we have been, this committee and the city of Minneapolis has been working with the Federal Reserve quite a bit. And the Federal Reserve is doing the minimum wage study is contracted to do the minimum wage study. But the Federal Reserve also plays a lot of important roles in our community, talking about what's actually happening in our economy. And traditionally, it's always kind of been based on like very specific numbers and very specific stakeholders. And they're working really hard to expand their group of stakeholders, particularly to include workers, small businesses, like broaden their landscape. So they're doing a survey of workers. And we just, I mean, Eric Garcia Luna, has he been to this committee before?
Wow. I don't think so. Is that the same?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And
yeah,
is he now
yeah,
at
yeah. And he's one of their Federal Reserve. So he's one of their
Oh,
community outreach folks.
oh,
So
fun.
this is the survey. I just put it in the chat. I mean, I got this at 2:45. So very hot off the presses that this is coming out. So I think next month we might talk about this a little bit more on the agenda of how can we get this survey out so that organizations like the Federal Reserve are able to account for on the ground experiences of, you know, workers, small businesses and large businesses. It's just they have such an inline to the large businesses. They're really reaching out to us to say, like, how do we get into these other communities more directly? So this is hot off the press announcement. I would have put it on the agenda had I known it was coming today. We weren't expecting it today. It will be available in Spanish and Somali, you know, by the end of the week. Okay, any other organizational updates from any other members of the committee? All right, so let's move right in then to the Downtown Workers Committee. I have Veronica and Brian Elliott listed as the facilitators on this portion.
Hi. I'm assuming people can hear me now.
We can hear you, but we can only see like your eyes.
Only my eyes?
There you go. Yeah, Microsoft Teams does this weird thing.
Okay, I'll just hold it out here. So hi, yes. So we've been having lots of conversations with downtown workers. And we had looked, it was maybe like a couple months ago, we had sent around a few different recommendations that the committee of workers was proposing, including emergency sick leave, like for essential workers, including the right to recall, which obviously, Unite Here and council members put a bunch of good work into passing. We had a number of different things on there, but given that the moment has shifted significantly, like we had recommendations on there related to employers, if employers are requiring masks, that they need to provide them for workers. And like now that the mask mandate is gone, that's shifted. But the city did, in the mayor in his press release, did send out information saying employers, if you're requiring your workers to wear masks, still we can provide them, and giving information such that the employers could have access to free masks to make sure that if they're still requiring them, that in the workplace that they could provide them. So that's great. Obviously the moment has shifted there, but so there are now a few other things that we're looking at. So one of the pieces is about the essential worker pay, which in a second I'll hand it over to Brian Elliott to say a little bit more about, because there's obviously the state component, and then like what's sort of left that we want to make sure to move at a city level. Additionally, there's a component about training. So we had always had in their recommendation around training. And initially it was about making sure that workers are trained on their rights related to COVID safety. That has shifted a little bit, considering that a lot of that stuff kind of just doesn't really exist anymore. But one of the things that we've seen, and this isn't news to anybody on this call, is that obviously, like in this pandemic, it is low wage work. All right.
And we
Can you hear me now?
like,
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay. So Black and brown communities, low wage workers get hit the hardest when there's a pandemic, when there's any kind of a massive crisis like this. Like we know that that's who gets hit the hardest. And so, now, okay, so we're kind of post-pandemic in terms of workplace regulations. But we just thought it's really important to note that like this is not going to be the last crisis, right? Like with climate change and everything, there are likely to be other pandemics. There are always, economic crises that hit. There are different crises that hit our communities, that hit our city. And we know who's the most impacted. And it just became so critical and so clear in this moment, that even when the governor is saying workers should be a part of creating the safety plan, not only were they weren't even trained on it. And that was like, we recently did a survey, and shoot, I'm like now realizing I don't have it in front of me. I'll send this information around them, but we recently did a survey with about 200 workers in downtown Minneapolis, across, a few different organizations. And it's just such a significant amount of workers never received any training. I want to say it was like 72% of workers said that they never received any training. And so that just is like screaming like, oh my God, if workers had training, like that could help. Like if employers were both giving workers the information and providing access to the resources to be able to use that training, workers could be a lot safer. And we are specifically talking about workers that are sort of the bottom of the economic rung, Black and brown workers. So all that to say, the training component becomes incredibly important. Just even moving forward. And so our proposal in this is, and actually, Brian Walsh, I sent you this. I don't know if that's been sent. I don't know if this has been sent out or not. But if you could send it out, and I'm sorry, I'm not in front of a computer, but if you could send it out, that'd be great. But it includes a proposal around training on workers, just rights and safety and the things that the parts of the law that the city actually, so it's, there's, yeah, so the parts of worker safety that the city enforces, that we would say, particularly as we are looking at downtown right now, looking at the most vulnerable populations of workers downtown, where the areas where we know that we're seeing, high violations and low reporting, right? So not like all of the office workers that work at Target or that like work at the city, but really like the sort of minimum wage jobs. Workers in downtown that work in those most vulnerable sectors would have the opportunity to call the city or email the city or whatever the mechanism is and say, we request a training for us and our coworkers. And that if a worker does that, then it has to happen, and it has to happen on paid time. And this was a piece of our initial proposal, was around workers being able to be trained on paid time. It's obviously super hard to manage because it's hard to mandate something when like the city doesn't even have a roster of all the businesses that exist in the city. And so our thinking was, if workers request it and they're able to request it anonymously such that they don't have that weight of like, oh, my boss is going to retaliate against me, or my boss may retaliate against me, that might be a good way to get workers trained. So if workers request it, then we do a training, and the organizations that are contracted by the city, so Setul and Rock and a Wood Center, would be able to provide training in partnership with Brian and his team, to make sure that workers have the rights respected. So that's the sort of big shift in proposal. And then there's this, sort of a long-term thing, but continuing to just name, like, we want to figure out how to work with the city to see how it can use the leverage that it has with licensing and permitting, in, different kinds of businesses that it licenses, and permitting with construction, to see how we, like, where there's like repeat offenders or like really bad offenders of workers' rights, those levers can be used. That's a bit of a longer term thing that needs more conversation, but that's still there as like as a recommendation. And then the fourth recommendation, sorry, I'm like talking a lot. So the first thing was figuring out the essential workers pay. Second thing is the training. Third thing is what I just named about using the leverage the city has around licensing and permitting. Fourth thing is it is about the budget, right? So every year at about this time, we're talking to the mayor and city council about the budget, what that means for the Civil Rights Department, what that means for community contracting specifically, to make sure that the most vulnerable workers get reached out to, in addition to the awesome work that Brian and team are doing, being on Univision and whatnot. So the proposal that came out of the worker subgroup was 8, especially now, given how many violations we've seen and such a lack of training and respecting of rights around COVID, was that we increase the budget to 8 investigators and $800,000 in community contracts. And just for a reminder to folks, and for folks that weren't here when we started these kinds of conversations, the sort of the standard that has been looked to in like solid models across the country has been like 1 investigator to every $100,000 of community contract money. And so that's why the 8 and 8. So like 8 investigators, 800,000 in community contracts. So I will stop there. I have said a lot of things, and I don't know if people want to go to questions, or if we want to hear a little bit more from Brian Elliott about the where things are in the essential workers piece, given the state level component of this.
If there's no questions, I'll jump in.
I can
All
add
right.
a
Go ahead, Brian.
reaction. Brian, is that okay?
Yeah, please.
And I mentioned this to Vera, but for everyone else, I think that the idea of a mechanism to request a training is a potentially a really powerful one, because the potential risk involved, and just it can be really intimidating for a particularly vulnerable or low-wage worker to report their boss, his or her boss, to the government. and like file a complaint or whatever we call it, or like report a violation. That in and of itself, complaint-based enforcement can be a barrier to enforcement. Just the mechanism itself. I think potentially just requesting a training is sort of a lower stakes thing and a lower stakes way to maybe shine a light on a workplace, or for a worker to feel empowered to do something and take their rights into their own hands or learn more, etc. So I think I think it's a really, really good idea. And just as you all take these things forward to policymakers, just remember, are you asking for a required training? Because I think that if what you want is to require it in all cases that it is requested by a worker, I think that would likely take a small but substantial amendment to one of our ordinances, which I don't see why that wouldn't be doable. It's just helpful if you're, I think, if you're clear in what you're asking for. I suppose the other option would be, to create the mechanism for workers to request a training, and then the city could also sort of request or offer to give that training. But they're under current law, some employers would be like, no, you're not welcome to do the training. It's expensive, and that's probably where it would end in some cases. So anyway, I think it's a great idea, and I'll stop there.
All right. So at the state level, just a quick update. The state they didn't pass. State earmarked $250 million for frontline worker pay, and set up a working group, basically punted to a working group to figure out how to distribute that money. 200, just for context, there's roughly 900,000 frontline workers in the state that were working throughout the pandemic. And so, I mean, if you divided that 250 million up among them, they'd get about $280 each, which is less than 1 week of supplemental UI, the $300 that folks on unemployment insurance were getting during the pandemic. And the latter was important. That pandemic UI was very important for people, and it was a lifeline. But the point I'm making here is that we're going to be working to set up a case that 250 million is insufficient for these workers. And so what they didn't do, however, was to require emergency leave be offered. They wouldn't even require it of businesses. The Senate refused to even require it of businesses who still qualify for a tax credit, a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for offering it. So as a result, they're leaving millions of dollars of federal tax credits on the table that could have gone to workers who needed to take time off for COVID purposes, whether they needed to quarantine or be tested or get vaccinated or care for a quarantined family member. So unfortunately, it didn't happen. But it means that because of the inadequacy of the state money that they're using, I mentioned we need to make the case for more. It does mean that we should be looking to figure out what the city can do to support its essential workers who've been, because what I like to say is, look, we rightly helped folks who were unemployed with additional resources through supplemental pandemic unemployment insurance. We helped businesses significantly with resources, including tax breaks on their forgiven PPP loans for, in some cases, very in some cases not, but in some cases very profitable businesses that received PPP loans because the Republicans were unwilling to target those tax breaks. And but what we haven't done is help those who were still on the job, making sure we could all stay safe and healthy and fed throughout the pandemic. So I do know that, for example, the city extended its own emergency leave policy for its staff recently. I think that was just last week. But we should be having a conversation about either emergency leave for workers who haven't been receiving it, a requirement that employers offer that for these very specific COVID-related purposes, or we should be, or we should be making an argument for a portion of the city's rescue plan dollars to go to frontline workers, because the rules for the ARP dollars for the city are the same essentially as those for the state. And so premium pay for frontline workers is an explicitly allowed use of those ARP dollars, whether it's at the city, the state, the county, or the school district level. So,
Brian, this is Kate. I have a question on that.
please.
How does FFCRA intersect with that? Because like we used FFCRA a huge amount in terms of helping cover time for people, whether they had COVID or they had to take care of a child, or even to cover the vaccine. And so, is there any realm of like technical assistance to help businesses know how to access that FFCRA? Because I've heard a lot of businesses not understand FFCRA, and it's a benefit that's already there.
Yes, I think that's a key part of what we need to be talking about, because as you're pointing out, Kate, right, it was extended under the tax break was extended under the American Rescue Plan, and still exists through the end of September unless it is extended, for all public employers and for private employers of under 500 workers. And so a piece of that, as you're saying, is, so a part of this question is, how do we ensure that workers whose employers get a dollar for dollar tax credit are accessing this tax credit? And part of that is figuring out very quickly what are the hurdles. And you're raising a very important one, which is just understanding how to, just understanding the process of, when you offer these, how do you get that tax break from, which is current, which in this iteration is a deduction against your Medicare payroll taxes. So how do you right? So a piece of that is technical support. There is another piece of this for a lot of workers who work at private employers of over or of 500 or more, whose employers didn't get access to the tax credit, and some of whom offered their workers this leave and others did not. And so, for example, the contractors that employ, the janitorial contractors that employ a lot of my members basically just said, you're SOL. You can use your own leave if you get COVID, or if you have to care for a family member, or anything like that. And the other piece that we know that I'll just mention and then I'll stop talking is that you know, there is a public health piece to this. We know that, you know, and I'm not talking about anti-vaxxers, but there are people who would get vaccinated, but are frankly very concerned about the potential for missing work. They've heard about people having side effects from the, you know, temporary symptoms from the booster shots, and so they're just afraid to get vaccinated because they cannot afford to miss a day or two of work, and especially for businesses that have access to the tax credit, this is an allowable use, is, you know, for people to get vaccinated. And so some of the lower vaccination rates that we see are concentrated in low-wage communities, low-wage worker communities, and the thought of missing pay to get vaccinated is a hurdle that we know workers are encountering. So there's a bunch of pieces to this, and it probably warrants us getting together, you know, later this month as a subcommittee of interested folks. And Kate, I know that you guys have been offering this, and I would very much welcome your insights on all this. And I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to be a part of that subcommittee because I think FFCRA is really complicated. I mean, we heavily relied on our payroll service provider in terms of how to do FFCRA because there's a lot of nuance there. Yeah, so I'd be happy to be a part of that subcommittee. And I think one of the issues we've been facing too is that as vaccinations have been available, for those staff that are not getting vaccinated, where can you still use FFCRA or not?
Right.
With that being said, I'd be happy to be a part of the subcommittee because I think we've dealt with a lot of the technicalities of it, and also where FFCRA has not provided coverage, and we covered people's time off related to COVID if they had exhausted the FFCRA benefit,
Mm-hmm.
Which I think there's more cases of that than people realize. Because COVID can last for more than 2 weeks, or you can have multiple family members that have been impacted by it. So I'd be happy to be part of that subcommittee.
No, one of our more active members was out for 5 weeks between his own between a quarantine after an exposure and then just suffering COVID.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
And I think one of the particular gaps is even if you have been vaccinated, if your children aren't able to be vaccinated, they are still at risk. And so you still may need FFCRA because, you know, your 5-year-old isn't vaccinated yet, for example. The other piece I'd add is that we really worked closely with the Minneapolis Department of Health around vaccination to come out and educate our staff, figure out how we could get them access to vaccines, et cetera. So there'd be another stakeholder to maybe include in this conversation. They've been really helpful to us.
That'd be great.
As a business.
Yeah, we worked closely with Department of Health to get vaccinations out into some of the underrepresented industries as well. I wonder if this is an opportunity to coordinate with BTAP on something too.
For those who don't have the video, I'm seeing Brian Walsh nod.
Always, I like hearing BTAP. Yeah, I think that was on on the list of recommendations, and I apologize for not sending it around yet. I'll send it around as soon as the meeting is over. And Davis had the great idea in one of our meetings previously of recommending, I guess, more and additional BTAP training for employers around all of this stuff. And I think that could potentially be a mechanism that the city would use to address Kate's comments around, well, how the heck do you actually access the tax credits? Because yeah, I would imagine that is a barrier.
Awesome. So would it be possible for you or Ashley to send around an invite for a meeting in the, next couple weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that the city council, when it created the downtown workers subcommittee, it also directed, I guess it was staff, but really directed the subcommittee to bring forward recommendations by the end of July, which is now. So
Yeah,
these.
and that's the recommendations that I brought forward. That's the proposal to go forward. And I did miss that. I apologize for that. Brian and Davis, whose idea it was of including in there like the same way that that workers, that employees can request a training, like employers could too, but that BTAP actually be thinking about taking the responsibility for leading those
And
trainings.
and this is Davis, and I just want to say I will make sure that when we have like the BTAP meetings about like when that comes up, I will make sure to say like this also needs to be educating employees too, like because I feel like that part could easily get lost when we flip it over to the BTAP side. So I will be our our spy, if you will, into the BTAP conversation.
Thank you, Davis. Yeah, and that would, I mean, that's another option or another mechanism is to actually fund the training of employees or workers through BTAP. I don't know. I mean, that
They totally could. I mean, I feel like a lot of those businesses would be that work through like I feel like, well, it's like the ones who need it probably wouldn't be the ones who are like, yeah, sure, come on in, but maybe that would put enough pressure on to say like to some. But I think it's not a bad idea to just say, hey, maybe that should be part of, because the mayor already earmarked money for BTAP in the ARPA funds. So
right. If it's not going to be mandated, or if for whatever reason it's not the idea is not to amend an ordinance, I think going through BTAP would probably make more sense because the infrastructure is already there. That's what BTAP is.
And the one thing I wonder is, so like, BTAP and the whole of CPED clearly has a much larger budget and kind of capacity than the Labor Standards Enforcement Division, which to me then is like a plus of like thinking about how can that money and those city resources support this work. But the thing I do wonder about is like you and your team, Brian, have the expertise in like engaging workers in a way that's kind of different from sort of the purpose of CPED, that I would want to like, I don't know, I would want to think about where does the sort of bottom lining of like, what's the curriculum and like what's the process? Like, where does that live? Because I think that is different. And I think we're seeing that too a little bit with the SWAP ordinance, and like them trying to figure out how to work with the public health. Is it public health?
Mhm.
Like working
Health
with public health,
department.
used to the health department that's used to working with like health for consumers, and now trying to figure out how to do it on the worker end or the independent contractor end is like, it's a real different.
Yeah, I wonder if I wonder if there's a way to go sort of have the program live in BTAP and then they sort of tap civil rights to bring in to provide the training essentially. And civil rights contracted organizations. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities. So Vero, these are the recommendations that the Downtown Workers Subcommittee are bringing forward. What do you need from this from the entire committee here tonight, just to, is it just
Yeah.
sort of like to let everyone know that this is what is going to be presented, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would want to hear if people have any concerns, like if this sounds right to folks. If there are, like obviously these are the things that come from workers who are like living on the front lines and like have a particular lens on this. But just hearing like if people have any concerns about it, people are excited about it, like how this committee, this overall just feels about it. Or if there are other questions. So there's the 4 areas that
I had a quick question for clarification on the rescue money going to Minneapolis. I saw did the mayor outline where he wanted to spend that already? And is there, I don't think it's set yet though. Does the council have to approve that, or is there an open ability to sort of, because I think Brian mentioned maybe putting some of that either towards this emergency leave portion outside of the tax credit potentially, or to put towards supplementing what the state has now. Do we know the process at the city level in terms of where that might be? I guess I've read a news article. That's the only reason I ask. I don't know anything beyond that, what the city is doing right now.
And that's, I'll jump in. That's a great, and somebody might know more than me. That's a great question, Elise. I know that the mayor put forward a plan, and I think the council just acted on that plan late last week. I don't know. I don't know if that was the end of the process or what comes next. I'm not sure, but the council took some action on that plan. I think it was just Friday, just a few days ago.
Oh, okay. So there may be some wiggle room within the broader categories of maybe where it's going, because I know some of that was going to supplement maybe community safety efforts or some of the, some of these other efforts downtown, but I didn't see the full scope. But just wondering if there was some wiggle room there for some of these programs still, or the trainings, or, as we look for additional budget, if we can supplement that.
Yeah, I think well, I'm guessing that even though, that there are these sort of broad outlines from the mayor and then whatever the council approved, there's a lot of money suddenly moving through. I think Brian just called it the ARPathon, and when he comes back, he might know about the procedure of it more than me. But to your point, Elise, even if it was already sort of divvied up, I think they're just sort of broad categories that are identified for it. So I'm sure that there's still room to figure out how to actually spend it.
I just posted some stuff in the chat. The city actually has a pretty good overview website at that link. And I think the one thing to be clear about ARP funding is like, this is just the first of like several phases. So even though we may not, have been able to like react on the front end as much as we would have liked, this is the first of many phases. And I just put in here like phase 1, which is what I think the might be what the council acted on. And then this tells a little bit of timeline for phase 2. And the school board website is saying that there's going to even be a phase 3 in 2022.
Got it. So there's a lot more opportunity to look towards some of that federal money, maybe to supplement some of the training to these other things they're looking for, maybe.
So we have these broad recommendations from the downtown workers. Are we calling it a council or a committee? Council committee.
Subcommittee, I think.
Subcommittee. Yeah, we didn't want to get too caught up in the name. Do we want to take a vote on these themes, knowing that this is still being developed as, these are the themes that we're going to put forward to the city council, and we're going to work together. It's a rapidly changing environment, so we know things could come back to be edited. But do we want to take a vote on these 4 themes? and I have to go back to it. Emergency extension of sick and safe time, training programs, funding, and business licensing enforcement. I mean, I guess I would request that we take a vote that it's okay to start moving these along. But knowing that at this time, they're just sort of draft recommendations. And maybe we could even say that these are our sort of like draft recommendations.
Is that a motion then, Chelsea? Or how do you want to do that?
I don't think I can make that motion as a chair, but I can, well, I don't know what Robert's Rules of Orders you all follow, but as chair, I would prefer if somebody else made that motion. You can use my verbiage if you like.
I make the motion that we take a vote on these draft recommendations to the City Council, the Downtown Workers Subcommittee. Does someone have to second it?
I second Davis.
So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion from the committee? Okay, so we haven't had to take a formal vote over Zoom yet. With this committee, at least. I have in lots of other committees, but not this one. And I think, Ashley, you told me when we did this, we had to have people actually individually record their votes. Is that correct?
Yeah, they just have to say their name and yes or no.
Okay.
Ashley, would you mind? I think we're ready then, unless there's any discussion. I'll maybe give another brief pause. Now's your chance if anyone wants to discuss anything whatsoever. And then Ashley, maybe you could just go down the members who are present and ask them to state their name and their vote.
Ashley, just one thing before you do that. I don't think whose numbers end in 82 and 83?
No.
For the folks who've dialed in, is the number that ends in 82 or the number that ends in 83 committee members? I guess we would assume then, if they're not identifying themselves, that they are not committee members, but are guests. Kate's number is the 10. So, okay, now you can go ahead, Ashley. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. Kate Davenport, your vote?
Yes.
Brian, is Brian back yet? Brian Elliott?
I am, and I vote yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Davis? Oh,
Yes, I vote yes, Davis.
Elise?
Yes.
Ginger?
Yes.
Madeline?
Yes.
Not sure. Veronica?
Yes.
And that is all.
Natalie.
Oh, I skipped Natalie.
I'm sorry. I think I misheard Madeline. I'm sorry. That happens all the time. Yes.
Oh, whoops, sorry. That's all.
How many yeses did we get there, Ashley? Is that, I didn't count.
By my count, it's 9.
Okay, excellent. Then we're good to go.
Thanks all for going through that process. Okay, any final comments on downtown workers? All right, well, I'm now going to turn it over to the always engaging and inspiring Madeline and Shunu to talk about their blueprint. This is many years of work coming to a conclusion, so I'm excited to hear about this.
Well, thank you so much, Chelsea. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Sunu Shrestha. I'm the city's senior advisor managing the portfolio on human trafficking and exploitation, which includes both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and the exploitation includes sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. I think it's very important to note that whenever we are talking human trafficking, we are including labor trafficking, and whenever we are talking exploitation, it's very important to note that labor exploitation is one form of exploitation that the city is currently trying to address in all of its forms. Very pleased to be with you. I think before we jump into the blueprint, I also want to very quickly note that my office, one-person office, my program or initiative still sits in the city coordinator's office, but like with all other initiatives and programs, it's still in that incubation phase. And in some months, that might change. So just a side note. Once again, thank you so much for providing us this time and opportunity to come and give you an update on the blueprint. We are very thankful for the time that you allowed us back in January of 2021, just some months ago, when we came and presented on the findings, a very comprehensive findings and recommendations that were outlined after a series of consultations with internal and external stakeholders. And like I stated in that meeting and and other meetings previously as well, when I just joined the city, it has been a 3-year-long process. And finally, and I'm sure Madeline is relieved as well that this process has been completed, and we've submitted the blueprint, the full document to the mayor and the city council just 2 weeks ago, 2 Mondays ago. I've certainly received a lot of positive feedback, a lot of good feedback and remarks from people, especially internal stakeholders and of course external stakeholders as well. And today we are here to hear if you have any questions on the blueprint, if you have any concerns, if you've had a chance to read it. It's a pretty lengthy document, which is why we also tried to break it down into different versions. One is a summarized version of the framework for action, which is primarily a consolidated recommendations, and the one-pager, which is what we are hoping that many of us can use as we are talking with our council members and the mayors in terms of these recommendations and how we see that apply into our work in the city department, especially here in this case, civil rights department, labor standards enforcement, contract compliance, complaint investigation, etc. So again, like I stated, we've submitted the recommendations. I'm still very unsure about what the next step is or are. Things are happening at a lightning speed, and at times they are very slow. But just after the submission of the blueprint, Councilmember Kano took the opportunity to utilize the blueprint to ask for $650,000 to provide services for victims of human trafficking and exploitation through the ARPA funding. And Councilmember Cunningham joined Councilmember Kano to draft an amendment to the mayor's budget. And fortunately, we had all 13 votes to see the successful passes of the amendment. So now I'm waiting to go onto that next process, which is drafting the RFP. And any other necessary procedures that will entail after the RFP until we successfully award the contracts to external vendors in Minneapolis. So that is one way I see this blueprint being implemented in the city. The next is, again, drafting a full-fledged budget for the implementation of the blueprint, which is where I think I will, not I think, but I will come back to you to seek your suggestion and guidance as to what you see is applicable in your work, especially for this council, what you see, what you've already seen, that some of the needs that just recently I heard from Vero presenting on the downtown workers committee and some of the recommendations. I could already hear some of the crossover between what's the recommendations there are and some of the recommendations in the blueprint as well. And of course, we talked with similar folks during our own process. So obviously the recommendations will be fairly similar. The overall LARS recommendations. But if there are any other recommendations that I, as the city staff and person advancing this work in the city, can uplift from your own recommendations, or if there are any other recommendations that you think would fit while you are talking with the council or the mayor, please do let me know, which is why I'm here to seek your support. And I'm also here to offer my support and any help that you need from me. I'll stop it there, and I'll let Madeline add anything that I may have missed or any other recommendations, things that she would like to highlight.
I think, Sunu, you did a pretty good job of giving an overview. You know, I'm especially thrilled that the blueprint immediately turned into money, which never happens. And so I feel like we've got real actual leadership here on the part of the city. I just want to say I was meeting for a totally different reason with a group of survivors today, and one of them talked about how she was nearly in tears listening to the mayor talk about housing for people with barriers, including prostitution convictions and other misdemeanor convictions, and how it felt like her words that had been incorporated into the blueprint had turned, she was hearing them from someone in power actually recognizing her needs and her desires and, you know, her policy analysis that had never happened before in her opinion. And she was like really deeply moved and so thrilled to have been part of this process. So this is something that I think the city can be really, really proud of. And I think we want to keep the momentum going here, that Sunu has done a really fantastic job of leading this through the city process. And hopefully we can get some pretty significant commitment from city departments to carry out the work. I mean, we're really, I think, grateful for everything civil rights has done as being one of our champions here. And so hopefully we can keep that going.
So with that, I think I will, and we will just stop it here to see if you have any questions, especially about the next process. One thing I would like to note is that in the previous times or earlier, with any sort of studies commissioned by the city, I've seen what was in fashion was people who, the staff who were responsible to do the studies, any research, after the completion of the project, went before the city council and presented on the findings. If the city council member, any members or city council asked what would it take to implement the recommendations, the staff would go back and work with the staff, their team, and would go back in front of the city council and did a presentation on the budget. But this time, my supervisor, the city coordinator's office, they are trying to do it differently. So they've asked me, I was really hoping to do a presentation. I had hoped that we would be provided an opportunity to do a presentation, because especially external stakeholders, they really wanted some kind of face-to-face interaction with City Council to see where they stood with some of their recommendations, just to hear their and see their reactions. But unfortunately, I would have to hold off on that for now because we are trying to do things a little differently. So I would have to draft a guesstimate of what it would take to implement the blueprint, and then present it in front of the City Council, present the full recommendations on policies, on what are some of the best practices that the city should implement, and then also what it would take to implement some of the ideas and programs and activities that are outlined in the blueprint. So that would have to certainly wait, but that doesn't mean that you as the committee and the council shouldn't be allowed to present on what's applicable to your work when you are doing your presentations, or Brian, even when you are putting together your report. If there are anything that you would want to take from the blueprint, please do feel free. So this is exactly what we or I have intended it to be, for all of us to use this document as a guide, as a blueprint, as the name suggests, and solidify our voices in making these asks from our elected leadership.
This is really exciting. I would love to see a like breakdown of this one pager. Is it actually one page? One page back and front. This one pager. I love that. You stretch it to the two sides. Maybe with some highlighting of these different foundational goals that do have overlap with the work of this committee. I mean, I think you could argue a lot of it does, but like what specifically, can we pull out of this that, directly overlaps with our work, particularly on the labor trafficking and that kind of thing. So that would be a good project. I know everyone has a lot of time on their hands to do something like that, but if we could do that Venn diagram of what overlaps, that would be great. All right, other questions or comments from the committee? Brian, you're off mute.
Sunu, were you saying that this is not going to be formally presented to the city council in a city council subcommittee? Is that, did I understand that right?
Yeah, not yet. So first I would have to draft a budget
Oh,
on different elements of the recommendations. For example, we've recommended that the city strengthens its enforcement. So I would have to sit with you, of course. Madeline will help us in sort of seeing through what that actually means in practice, and asking you what you would need to strengthen the enforcement. Would you need additional person? Would you need more training? When we do that assessment, then we would attach a budget to it. If you need additional person, what's their salary would be? Would you contract with somebody else? If stronger enforcement means investing in external contracts, for example, the one that you have currently, then we would attach that money with it. Once I have sort of a ballpark figure of what that would be for majority of the programs and services that we've recommended in the blueprint, then I would do a presentation. It doesn't have to be a perfect budget. It's never going to be a perfect budget because I myself don't know what would some of these programs will be. We've sort of generalized some of the programs and didn't provide specific details because we don't want to, because it would really limit us in being innovative when we limit ourselves and narrow it down so much. Which is why it's going to be a process, which is why when I sent that first email to all of you, especially department leaders, supervisors, that I'd be reaching out to you in working through these details and asking you what you would need, and where we would go from here is going to be that next step for me. And perhaps Madeline, through her work, can help us in navigating some of those details and challenges that we'll certainly encounter. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, it does. It does. So,
Oh.
so you will be presenting eventually, but there's still more stages here and a lot more work to figure out the budgeting for all of the different pieces in the current recommendation.
That is correct.
Okay.
Which is why I'm actually really relying on the presentations many of you are going to be doing, so you could include components of it. So council members, elected officials have some idea as to what's coming. They all have the document, they know what's in the document, but perhaps it's sort of it sort of gives them a preview as to what's coming up when we do the drafting of the budget.
That's great. And this is really great timing because we're talking about going in front of council with the downtown workers recommendation and the annual report of labor standards. So this is great timing.
I'm glad to hear that.
Kate, were you trying to get in?
No.
Any other questions from the committee? All right. I think that concludes this portion of the agenda. So thank you both for this amazing amount of work that you've been putting into this project. And it's really exciting to see progress, so it's really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. This is really awesome. Appreciate you.
Trying to find the agenda again. Here we go. I was in all their documents. Oh, well, I guess that is the end of our agenda. So any last minute announcements before we wrap up? All right, well, just a big thank you to the team at the Department of Labor Standards, Brian and Ashley and everyone. I know you've gone through a lot of leadership changes there, and this committee has just plugged along without any hiccups. So we really appreciate it. Thank you for everything. I guess we will adjourn. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks, all.
you.